Chapter 861. Entomb the ground split open, and the head of a massive insect appeared from beneath. Sonny was thrown off balance, and much worse, there was no time for him to dodge the sudden attack. He could not even use Shadow Step. Grab! Before he could do anything, the maw of the fallen devil closed around one of his legs. Sharp mandibles scraped against his greave, smearing revolting mucus all over the bleak steel of the undying chain. The good news was that his transcendent armor turned out to be too tough to be bitten through by the damned abomination. No matter how hard the creature pressed with its jaws, the armored greave refused to bend or be pierced. It also withstood the corrosive effect of the liquid oozing from the insect's maw. Perhaps things would have been different if Sonny did not possess such a high divine affinity. But with the brilliant will enchantment reinforcing his armor, it reached a stupendous level of durability. The bad news, however, was that Sonny was completely immobilized. Even if the fallen devil could not bite off his leg, there were countless other abominations that were already dashing forward to press the attack and rip him apart. Every armor had its cracks, and the undying chain was no different. "Let go, you filthy bug." Sonny reversed his grip on the cruel sight and thrust it down. His strike was so powerful that the incandescent blade pierced all the way through the impregnable chitin of the insect, cracking the thick plate protecting its forehead and melting parts of it away. Despite the terrible wound, the devil refused to die. Even with its listless black eyes turning into liquid and evaporating, it rose from the ground and then viciously jerked the upper part of his torso, swinging Sonny into the ground. No matter how tough his armor was, at this point, human bones would have snapped and shattered. However, Bone Weave stubbornly held his femur and tibia together. It hurt like hell, though. Arg! Slamming into the rocks, Sonny stubbornly thrust his spear deeper into the devil's head and then briefly glanced at the approaching soldiers of the stone hive. Following his command, the shadow tentacles shot forward and crushed a few closest ones. At the same time, two dark hands appeared from his lower torso and grabbed the devil's jaws, trying to pry them apart. It was of no use. The creature was just too strong. The fallen devil possessed a wicked intelligence, too. Seeing that neither its bite nor its slam managed to damage the thorny opponent, it decided to change tactics. Instead of trying to savage the enemy, the giant insect simply clenched its jaw tighter, and then dove into the ground, pulling Sonny with it. The solid stone parted around them like liquid. Not good. Like every human, Sonny harbored a deeply rooted fear of being buried alive. And this was exactly what was happening. Pulled dozens of meters into the solid stone, he was going to be buried under its crushing weight if the devil let go. Perhaps that was exactly the bastard's plan. Before that could happen, however, Sonny snarled and thrust the cruel sight even deeper, pushing it into the body of the devil as far as he could. At the same time, he commanded the spear to assume its maximum length, and then sent all four of his shadows from his body onto the somber blade. Augmented by them, the divine flame summoned by the dark mirror, enhancement suddenly grew even hotter. For a moment, it seemed as though the giant insect became illuminated from within. A blinding light escaped from the cracks of its carapace, and then the devil contorted in a terrible convulsion. Just a few seconds later, it was immolated from within, turning into nothing but an empty, blackened shell. You have slain a fallen devil, Stone Titan Flea. Your shadow grows stronger. Sonny shuddered, feeling his heart turn cold. That's great, but the devil was dead, and so its unnatural power dissipated. The stone surrounding them turned back into its solid state, encasing Sonny in a cold, inescapable coffin. There was no light, no room to move, no air to breathe. Even with a master's prodigious might, digging himself out was impossible. A creeping horror entered Sonny's mind. Luckily, he was not just any master. Stretching his shadow sense upward, Sunny simply used Shadow Step and emerged from a stretch of darkness above ground. The cold air of Antarctica had never felt so sweet. The inhospitable, dim sky had never looked so beautiful. Suppressing the desire to fall to his knees and take a gasping breath, Sunny swiftly looked around to evaluate the situation. He had only been absent from the battlefield for a dozen heartbeats, but in a clash like this one, just a few seconds was an eternity. Just as he had suspected, things were not looking great. His absence left the rear of the human formation wide open, and a tide of Stone Hive soldiers was already flowing up the slope, approaching it. Most were already well outside the range of effect of the dying wish. That was really, really bad. Sunny's eyes widened. I have to come up with something, fast. Since there was no time to think, only a single idea came to mind. It'd lead to a lot of unforeseen circumstances, but forced to act immediately, he did not see any other choice. Commanding the extraordinary rock to relay his command, Sunny barked. Samara Kimi, turn around and open fire. At the same time, he dismissed his armor. As both of his soldiers unleashed a hail of bullets at the flood of abominations advancing from the back, the undying chain disappeared into a swarm of sparks. At the same time, wisps of dark fog swirled around his body. For a few seconds, Sunny was left without any protection. Ignoring that chilling fact, he dove into the mass of nightmare creatures, rampaging between them as the dark fog slowly coalesced into a different suit of armor. Luckily, or rather due to his panicked effort, no attack managed to land on his body in that time. Glossy onyx, ominous lines, intricate and ancient design. Finally, the mantle of the underworld wove itself into existence. His shadows slid onto its black surface. Merged with it, the dying wish was suddenly augmented by the underworld armament enchantment. The nightmare creatures advancing on the rear of the human formation slowed down and stalled. Then, they froze in place. And then, one after another, they slowly turned around and peered at Sunny. Subjected to an almost palpable pressure of immense hatred and bloodlust, he smiled nervously. "Oh, come at me, bastards, look, I'm very tasty." With fervor and frenzy that made him shudder, the mass of nightmare creatures obliged. The death wish enchantment worked. In fact, it worked a little bit too well. Damn, damn, damn. Sunny was drowning in the tide of nightmare creatures. No matter how strong he was, no matter how fast he was, no matter how well he understood the attack patterns of the Stone Hive soldiers, there were just too many of them for him to handle without paying the price. The mantle of the underworld sustained more and more hits. The onyx armor mostly held for now, and what little damage it did sustain was swiftly mended by the living stone enchantment. His body beneath it, however, was hurting. There were no holes in him yet, but it was just a matter of time. If there was one good thing about the situation, however, it was that the irregulars were completely safe from being attacked from the back. Sunny was holding the mass of abominations advancing from the rear single-handedly, killing more and more of them as he desperately tried to survive. By now, all the snow around him had melted, and the rocks were covered by the viscous blue lymph. Savaged carcasses of nightmare creatures littered the ground, and 3 shadow tentacles were rampaging among those that remained. The 4th had been destroyed by another fallen abomination, whom Sunny then finished off with the shining blade of the cruel sight. The twilight enveloping the summit of the mountain was long gone. High above, a constant stream of lightning tore the darkness of the cold sky, and on the mountain slope itself, chaotic flashes of light produced by winter and other awakened ensnared in a bloody battle with the Stone Hive created a strange and beautiful illumination. Sunny himself was surrounded by nothing except for darkness, however, since the shadow lantern devoured any light that reached him. I can't go on like this for much longer. His only solace was that he did not need to. Soon, help would arrive. Sunny just had to hold on long enough for Master Jet to finish off the corrupted lieutenants of the hive and join the battle against the lesser abominations. Slaying a score of corrupted was not something an Ascended was supposed to be able to do, but he had faith in Soul Reaper's ability. After all, even saints were wary of fighting her. Speaking of Colonel Jet, killing a frenzied fallen beast with a devastating slash of the cruel sight, and at the same time piercing the head of an awakened monster with the ghostly blade of the Moonlight Shard, Sunny used the carcasses of the dead creatures to buy himself a moment of respite and glanced higher up the slope, where Soul Reaper was in a similar position as him, drowning in abominations, as she was trying to hunt down the strongest among them before they could hunt her. Master Jet was moving with murderous purpose and terrifying speed, dodging the storm of attacks as she descended upon one corrupted after another, the blade of her glaive ignoring all physical armor as it viciously struck directly at their darkness-infested soul cores. All of it was very bizarre, and also gave him a better understanding of why Soul Reaper was so feared by other Awakened. Very few humans possessed powerful means of defending themselves from soul attacks. However, she was not even delivering blows infused with soul damage. Instead, her glaive was somehow able to deliver physical damage directly to the souls of her enemies. More than that, it could bypass all forms of armor and strike at the vulnerable cores. Scary. But there was more strangeness about how Master Jet fought. She was just too fast, too strong, too deadly. Even knowing that her cohort was assembled based on their ability to augment the combat performance of their commanding officer, Sunny could not explain how Soul Reaper was so frighteningly powerful. Just her physical prowess alone was almost on par with his own, which was not supposed to be possible. Not only did Sunny possess more cores, he also enjoyed the enhancement of shadows. And yet, he couldn't deny what he saw. Her battle style, meanwhile, was brutal and domineering, honed and perfectly sharpened to achieve a single purpose: deliver swift death and utter devastation to her enemies. While it lacked flair and refinement, when Sunny looked at how Soul Reaper fought, he felt something that he had never felt before. It was the lethal weight of thousands and thousands of deathly battles. He did not think he had ever encountered a human fighter that seemed to possess quite as much combat experience. Her technique possessed a dark depth to it that he had yet to sense from anyone else. Not even Pierce and Welve, two high-ranking knights of valor, could compare to Soul Reaper Jet. Not even the saints he had met. It made sense, in hindsight. Saint-serving legacy clans might have been more powerful, but they led a very different life than someone like Master Jet. The government was always short on personnel and resources, and so every capable fighter serving them had to do more. Considering that Soul Reaper was possibly the most capable of them, she had to also be one of the most active government operatives. What it meant was that, while masters and saints of the legacy clans only undertook the most important combat missions and enjoyed sufficient rest between each battle, she had been sent to deal with emerging gates, rampaging nightmare creatures, awakened criminals, and other dangerous issues almost every single day. No wonder Master Jet always seemed a bit sleep-deprived. Battle after battle, day after day. Considering that she had entered government service more than a decade ago, that would indeed make Soul Reaper the most seasoned human fighter Sunny had ever met, at least in terms of pure number of combat encounters and confirmed kills. Strangely, not even the other irregular captains seemed as accomplished in battle and slaughter, despite being older than Jet. Suddenly, he was overcome by burning curiosity. I wonder if I can shadow her combat technique. At the level of masters, a battle style was more than just a set of moves combined with a special mental framework. Due to how intricate their control of essence was, a style also included unique patterns of essence reinforcement. Knowing that he only had a split second left before his own battle would continue, Sunny strained his eyes and peered beneath the surface of Master Jet's mortal shell. After reaching the third step of shadow dance, his ability to observe and understand the flow of essence had vastly improved, and so. However, what he saw left him shaken and disturbed. Sunny had seen souls that were radiant and full of light, and he had seen souls that were being consumed by a spreading corruption. However, he had never seen a soul like Jet's. It was lightless and shrouded in darkness, almost like his own. A single powerful core burned in its depths, superposed against her heart. The core itself was strange, bizarre, and filled him with an eerie sense of profound unease. The ethereal orb was irregularly shaped and much larger than it was supposed to be, grossly overshadowing the size of other ascended cores he had witnessed. Its surface was covered by a net of deep, twisting cracks. No, not quite. It was more like the whole core was assembled from numerous shards, as if it had been shattered once and then crudely assembled back into an uneven sphere. Some shards seemed to match each other, while others did not fit well, bringing a sense of chaos to an already flawed and fractured, disfigured construct of Soul Reaper's core. However, there was also a certain order and beauty to the ugly disharmony of it. The patchwork sphere of broken shards shone with furious, radiant light. It was brimming with a stunning amount of soul essence, which was much more than an ascended should have possessed. However, unlike most cores, this one's radiance was not uniform. Instead, most of the light was concentrated in its depths, while the outer edges were dark and dull. More than that, thin streams of light were constantly flowing through the cracks of the shattered core and dissipating into nothingness. They were like water slowly seeping out of a cracked vessel. Despite that, Master Jet's essence did not seem to be diminishing. Instead, as Sunny watched, the strange soul core only grew brighter. What the? At that moment, Soul Reaper had just slaughtered another corrupted abomination. This one had taken her longer to put down, since as a monster, it possessed two cores. Each had to be destroyed with separate strikes. As soon as both perished, however, the creature twitched and collapsed to the ground. Then, something strange happened. When the corrupted insect died, a flood of tainted essence seemed to rush into Master Jet's fractured core. The remnants of the fetid darkness permeating it were then burned away by the furious light, and soon, a stream of pure radiance flowed into the brilliant center of the shining sphere. Sunny was left very puzzled by what he had just seen, and a little bit troubled as well. I guess there really are all kinds of bizarre aspects. He was one to talk. His own soul was not exactly the picture of normalcy. In any case, distracted by the unusual nature of Master Jet's soul core, Sunny had missed his chance to study her battle technique. All he managed to notice was that her flesh was saturated by essence to a much larger degree than usual. It was as if, unlike all the other awakened, Soul Reaper's ability to reinforce herself with essence was not limited by the modest capacity of human flesh, or at least had a limit so high that it put the rest of them to shame. That would partially explain why she was so strong and fast despite possessing only a single core. This just went to show that having multiple cores was not an absolute advantage. There were a lot of strange and unimaginable powers out there, many of which could achieve the same result through different means. However, they wouldn't be as versatile. Would I be able to win against her in a fight? Sunny was not sure. He was reasonably confident in his ability, but then again, as someone who often achieved victory through being underestimated, he did not want to fall into the same trap. Even if he won, what would be the cost? Losing one or two cores was not going to kill him, most likely, but being left with a crippled soul was small consolation for victory. Maybe that was why saints were reluctant to fight Soul Reaper despite being much more powerful than her, and why many people treated her with fear and resentment. Sunny would have loved to ponder on these issues, but sadly, his time was up. The Stone Hive soldiers were already jumping over the carcasses he had used to hide behind, and their frenzy was just as murderous as before. Gripping the cruel sight, he lunged forward and pushed it into the tough carapace of another enemy. Hundreds of nightmare creatures descended upon the three cohorts of the irregulars, with Soul Reaper diving into their tide alone to hunt down the most dangerous foes. The initial clash was not as obliterating as it could have been. Supported by Queen and her sharpshooters, the melee fighters held, but were instantly surrounded. Behind them, Master Sunless, the youngest of the first company captains, was somehow holding off the entire flanking force of abominations by himself. Even if irregulars had time to look back, they wouldn't see much except for a veil of strange darkness that refused to dissipate despite the constant flashes of bright light produced by the battle. All they could perceive were the deafening shrieks of dying nightmare creatures and the cracking noises of parting chitin that resounded from the depths of unnatural darkness, as well as smell the sickening stench of burning flesh. One of the soldiers staggered back after killing another bug and briefly looked back. At that exact moment, a disfigured body of a massive fallen beast flew out of the darkness and crashed onto the rocks, splattering fetid blue lymph all over the mountain slope. It was more or less torn into two halves. Not cut, torn. The soldier shuddered. Gods, what kind of monster is that kid? Suddenly, a blinding flash momentarily turned the world white. High above them, two gargantuan forms clashed furiously, producing a deafening thunderclap. The whole mountain shook from the violent force of their impact. Cursing his luck, the irregular tried to throw all unnecessary thoughts out of his mind and lunged back into the deadly melee. There were still hundreds of the damned bugs for them to kill. By his side, other soldiers of the first irregular company fought for their lives. No one faltered, no one allowed despair to poison their mind. Each of them gave it their all, full of determination and resolve worthy of the government's best. And yet things weren't going too well. The enemy was just too numerous, vicious, and overwhelming. Worse than that, the cursed bugs were wickedly smart and coordinated. Something had to change soon. Stuck in the middle of a never-ending massacre, barely holding on, and sensing a ruinous hint of exhaustion already seeping into his muscles, Sonny knew that the battle was entering its decisive stage. For now, it seemed to remain in a fragile equilibrium. The Jade Beetle and Saint Tyrus were clashing somewhere high above, neither of them capable of striking down the adversary yet. On the ground, Master Jet was fighting alone in the tide of nightmare creatures, seeking out the most powerful foes. She had already killed many, but her task was far from being accomplished. The irregulars held, pushing back against the rabid onslaught of the Stone Hive. They had managed to avoid being overwhelmed, but could not throw the enemy back and go on the offensive. Even with Winter and her sharpshooters taking out the most deadly fallen abominations, the situation was extremely precarious. And finally, Sonny was protecting the rear of the formation. He was containing his share of nightmare creatures as well, but was not anywhere near prevailing against them. For every hive soldier he killed, two immediately took its place. Neither side could wipe out the other. This balance, however, could be destroyed at any moment. Time was working against the irregulars, for the most part, since their soul essence and endurance were not infinite. The soldiers were not going to be able to keep up with the ruthless tempo of the furious battle for much longer. Their only hope was that Soul Reaper would finish off the last of the corrupted abominations and join the fight against the mass of lesser soldiers soon. However, from a few glimpses that Sonny had caught, things weren't going too well for the commander of the first irregular company. Master Jet had quickly dealt with the comparatively weak corrupted, but now only the most powerful of them remained. More than that, the Stone Hive seemed to have understood how much of a threat this single human represented. With each second, it was getting harder and harder for Soul Reaper to move and attack her targets. She would probably be able to kill them all eventually, but was that going to be fast enough? Currently, Sunny was not sure. I need to do something. He had extinguished the divine flames burning within the blade of the cruel sight to conserve essence, and was now fighting against the frenzied abominations with nothing but its somber silver steel. Mounds of corpses surrounded him, and more creatures were jumping over their fallen brethren every second to lunge at the hateful human. But what can I do? How was he supposed to break the balance of the battle in favor of the human force? He had already done his best to gain the upper hand in his own section of the battlefield, and failed. Preventing the soldiers of the stone hive from advancing at the rest of the irregulars was all that he could achieve here. Changing the scales of the main front line was also outside his ability. If Sunny chose to join the awakened fighters, they would gain a boost of inspiration from the dying wish. However, they would also be forced to split their focus and defend against attacks from two directions. Whatever benefit he could bring would be invalidated by the increased pressure. Assisting Master Jet was out of the question. Although Sunny was more than capable of slaying a corrupted abomination or several, it would take him some time. Not to mention that to achieve real results, he was going to have to abandon his position behind the formation of the irregulars. So then, only one component of the battle remained. Dodging an especially fierce attack of a bloodthirsty bug, he used one of the shadow tentacles to suddenly pull himself away from the advancing enemies and pierce the body of a somewhat startled abomination a dozen meters further down the slope instead. Then he briefly looked up. Two giant shapes were entangled with each other high in the dark skies. Arcs of lightning danced between them, and rivers of caustic black ash were flowing through the air like clouds. His face turned grim. It's too strong, I can't kill it fast enough. But then again, did he need to? Deciding something, Sunny sighed and threw the cruel sight into the maw of a lunging abomination. Then, he closed his eyes and tried to forget about the fact that he was surrounded by a swarm of nightmare creatures, each of them driven crazy by the desire to tear him apart. The shadows unleashed from the small lantern that was tied to his belt suddenly surged forward and formed a barrier around him. Even the tentacles that had been slaughtering hive soldiers dissipated and merged into its dark walls. Within the barrier, Sunny summoned Morgan's warbow. As a swarm of scarlet sparks appeared in the air, a heavy blow shook the shadow cage he had constructed around himself. Then another, and another, and another. Soon, countless strikes were raining on it, making the surface of the barrier shake and crack. Sunny had made the cage as durable as he could. Infused with his ascended essence, it was much more resilient than the armored hull of the mighty battleship he had once helped preserve. And yet, just a few breaths later, it was already crumbling. Wide cracks appeared on its surface, and then a sharp chitin blade shot through one of them, scraping against the onyx surface of the mantle of the underworld and throwing Sunny back. However, it was enough. As the black bow appeared in his hand, Sunny commanded the shadow cage to transform itself. Immediately, it lost solidity and substance. Instead, long and sharp spikes shot forward from the barrier in all directions. A few abominations were skewered by them, but most were only stalled for a moment as deep scratches appeared on their carapaces. Not paying them any attention, Sunny looked up and drew his bow. Soul arrow. Death dealer. This time, a lustrous arrow that appeared to be made out of pale gold appeared on the string. Its wide broadhead, which was perfect for slicing flesh and dealing devastating wounds, was radiating a soft golden radiance. As time seemed to slow down, Sunny took aim, wrapped his shadows around the arrow, and then sent it soaring into the sky. Flying through the darkness, the arrow reached its target almost instantly. The target, of course, was the corrupted tyrant. However, Sunny was not aiming to kill it. He knew all too well that a creature like that would not be destroyed by a single strike, no matter how much essence he poured into it. The golden arrow did not strike the milky white chitin or pierce the creature's eye. Instead, it hit one of its translucent wings, tore through it, and then bit deep into the base of another one. At the same time, Sunny activated a third enchantment. Burden of Peace, enchantment description. After soul arrows pierce the flesh of an enemy, their weight can be drastically increased. Lodged deep into the jade beetle's flesh, the golden arrow suddenly grew as heavy as a ship's anchor. Far below the monstrous tyrant, Sunny smiled in satisfaction. Try and fly away now, bastard. Sunny was not powerful enough to casually slay a corrupted tyrant. Yet, defeating one was not outside the realm of possibility for him anymore, but it would require a good amount of meticulous study and preparation. Even then, challenging a nightmare creature of such immense power meant dire risk to his life. However, Sunny did not really need to kill the jade beetle. All he really needed to do was to break the balance of power between the monstrous tyrant and Sky Tide. Something like that was more easily said than done, but Sunny had several advantages that very few people possessed. He had a bow created by the best forgemasters of the great clan Valor, or maybe even King Anvil himself. That bow demanded immense strength to be drawn, but was capable of sending arrows much further, and imbued them with much greater force. He had the Death Dealer enchantment, a rare divine affinity that translated into highly destructive soul arrows, and the ability to see through the darkness devouring the cold sky of Antarctica. More importantly, he had enough power and ability to buy himself enough time to make a good shot. As a result, the divine arrow he had sent tore through one of the tyrant's wings and dealt modest damage to another. Just like that, 2 of the 4 wings of the jade beetle were wounded. That alone might have not robbed it of the ability to fly, but combined with the weight of the burden of peace, the result severely reduced the creature's mobility in the air. Sadly, it did not plummet to the earth as Sunny had hoped, but it was enough to give Saint Tyrus a crucial advantage. Using the window of opportunity created for her by Sunny's arrow, she lunged into a recklessly committed attack without wasting a single moment. Slashing at the 2 untouched wings of the jade beetle with her steel talons, Sky Tide finally managed to break them. Then she delivered a terrible blow with her beak and threw the abomination down. Wounded and barely able to keep its weight in the air, the corrupted tyrant was ruthlessly sent into a perilous fall. The jade beetle tried to slow down the speed of it, but failed. A few moments later, the massive body hit the slope of the mountain with a thunderous crash. However, Sunny was too busy to see any of this. Because, while his arrow had managed to turn the tables of the titanic clash in the skies, he had to survive the consequences of that success, somehow. Sunny had to burn through a lot of essence to have a hope of dealing serious damage to the corrupted tyrant, and so, his reserves were now very close to being empty. He had discarded the cruel sight to summon Morgan's warbow and buy himself enough time to create the shadow cage, and so, he was now more or less unarmed in front of the swarm of nightmare creatures. He had wrapped the soul arrow in 3 of his 4 shadows, and so, they needed time to return. Even worse, making the fateful shot left him open to enemy attacks for far too long. Even before Sky Tide delivered her vicious strike, Sunny was already dearly regretting his actions. Dismissing both the warbow and the distant cruel sight, he then summoned the latter back. However, the somber spear would only appear after several precious seconds, leaving him not much choice but to face the avalanche of chitin and sharp mandibles with his bare hands, or the short and thin blade of the moonlight shard at best. Instead of using the ghostly stiletto, though, Sunny simply commanded one of the wild shadows surrounding him to flow into his hands and turn into a dark odachi. Manipulating the shape of shadows was not a straightforward task. Forming a simple tentacle was the easiest, since it was not too far removed from the natural state of the shadows. However, the more precise, specific, and compressed the shape was, the more concentration and essence it took to achieve it. A sword hard enough to withstand the rigors of battle and sharp enough to cut through the flesh of the enemies was not easy to create. Usually, it would have taken Sunny some time and a lot of mental exertion to make one from a formless shadow. However, the black Odachi appeared in his hands almost instantly. That was because Sunny had methodically trained several applications of shadow manifestation during the 6 calm months after the second nightmare. He had come up with a small number of forms that could serve his basic needs in battle, such as a barrier, a spike, a chain, a sword, and created them over and over again, day after day, until manifesting them became an instinct. That was why it only took a split second for the shadow sword to manifest when he needed it. Of course, as a blade created from ascended essence, it was comparable to an ascended weapon in terms of sharpness and lethality. Sunny was just not sure how long he would be able to maintain the dark Odachi, considering that keeping it tangible was slowly eating through the scarce remains of his essence. Grab! He barely managed to meet the first foe with a strike, neatly cutting its body in 2 halves. Although Sunny had long grown accustomed to using a spear, holding a sword still felt the most familiar to him. Fighting with an Odachi again felt like meeting an old friend. He would have smiled if there was not a crushing wave of abominations falling down on him. Sharp blades of chitin struck at the mantle of the underworld, throwing Sunny off balance. Using the residual momentum of his previous strike, he slashed with the Odachi and severed the legs of a fallen beast attacking him, then thrust his sword forward, piercing the head of another. Something crashed into him from the side, causing Sunny to stagger. Bad! Sunny paled as he realized that a moment later, he would fall and become buried under a mass of abominations. Luckily, at that moment, something massive and dreadfully heavy crashed into the mountain with terrible speed. The impact caused the whole slope to tremble, as if from a powerful earthquake. As a result, not only Sunny, but also every other irregular, as well as every soldier of the stone hive, were suddenly thrown to the ground. A huge cloud of snow and stone debris rose into the air. Hitting the ground with a muffled yelp, Sunny rolled and tried to maintain the shape of his Odachi. Luckily, his training had not been in vain. Even after being startled by the earth-splitting fall of the tyrant and jolted by the sudden collision with the slope of the mountain, he did not allow the shadow sword to unravel. Argidam! Slightly disoriented, Sunny sat up and looked around, expecting to see monstrous insects rushing to finish him off. To his relief, the soldiers of the stone hive were in a similar position as him, despite possessing 6 legs and a center of gravity that was much lower to the ground relative to their height. They were all sprawled on the cold rocks, trying to get up. Actually, there were surprisingly few of them around him. Those that were alive, at least, crushed corpses littered this particular stretch of the slope, flattened so thoroughly that it was hard to recognize the shape of the chitin-clad abominations. Sunny strained to regain his wits and frowned. Did I do that? The damage seemed too exaggerated to be done by Sunny or his shadow tentacles. He couldn't see very far, either, because a wall of white stone was blocking his view. Where did this crag come from? If he remembered correctly, there were no large boulders or tall outcroppings near where he had fought. Had he rolled that far down the slope? As Sunny was trying to understand why a wall of rock suddenly appeared in front of him, a stream of inky black liquid flowed down its smooth white surface. Then the wall of stone slightly moved. His eyes widened. Oh crap! Craning his neck, Sunny managed to get a better look at the thing that he had assumed to be a stone cliff. Of course, it was not. Instead, it was the carapace of the corrupted tyrant that had been thrown into the mountain by Sky Tide's vicious attack. The creature seemed battered, with its milky white chitin cracked in several places and leaking viscous black blood, but very much alive. In fact, at the same time as Sonny looked up at it, the jade beetle's expressionless black eyes shifted and peered directly at him. Its terrifying mandibles moved slightly. "Oh crap!" Sonny jumped back at the same time as one of Tyrant's legs came down, shattering the mountain slope and sending another tremor running through it. He was only saved by his quick reaction and a bit of luck. The shadow Odachi whistled through the air and struck the white chitin, only to bounce off of it without dealing any damage. The jade beetle stared at him with its unfathomable black eyes and moved, slowly rising. It opened its maw, where a cloud of black ash was already swirling, ready to be spat out. Sonny knew that if that ash enveloped him, something very bad was going to happen. For a split second, he was paralyzed by fear. Then, the familiar weight of the cruel sight calmed Sonny down. The somber spear finally finished manifesting itself into reality, and he instinctively caught it by letting go of the hilt of the shadow Odachi with one hand. What difference does it make? Sonny stared at the domineering tyrant in horror, and then did the only thing he could think of, infusing some of his last drops of essence into the cruel sight to imbue it with an elemental property. He threw the spear again, only a moment after being reunited with it. He did have enough presence of mind to put some thought into what type of elemental damage to choose, though. Neither divine flame nor soul damage would do much in this situation, so. That might work, I think. The somber spear disappeared into the cloud of darkness wreathing in the creature's maw without a trace. A moment later, the tyrant suddenly shuddered and let out a shrill, deafening shriek. Its movement slowed down for a second or two. That was more than enough time to give Sonny a chance to run away. Turning around, he dashed up the slope with as much speed as he could muster. The cloud of ash shot to chase him, but quickly dissipated due to the fact that the jade beetle was distracted by torturous pain. The element Sonny had chosen was not the most destructive, but it was insidious, persistent, and extremely painful. That element was corrosion. To be more precise, it was a special kind of wicked corrosion that the Dark Mirror had memorized after Sonny inhaled a lungful of Wormvine's poisonous miasma back on the shipwreck island. Blood Weave had overcome it without any trouble, so he did not expect to deal much damage to the tyrant. However, it had hurt like hell to deal with it, so Sonny hoped that the damned monstrosity would be distracted for a few seconds, giving him a chance to retreat. That's right, retreat with dignity, not run away in panic. As he swiftly retreated, Sonny felt a cold shiver running down his spine. The jade beetle had to be preparing another attack. At that moment, a shadow fell from the sky. Saint Tyrus, in her human form and wielding a saber that seemed sharp enough to cut the fabric of the world itself, flashed through the air and collided with the corrupted tyrant somewhere behind his back. Sonny, meanwhile, finally saw the battlefield through the cloud of snow that had been thrown up by the jade beetle's fall. The irregulars were slowly rising to their feet, and so were the soldiers of the stone hive. Only one figure appeared to have withstood the earthquake and used the shock of it to her advantage. Some distance away, Master Jet landed on the swaying body of the last corrupted abomination and thrust her glaive deep into its flesh. A vicious smile appeared on her face as the creature shuddered and fell down. The battle formation of awakened warriors was broken, but Soul Reaper was finally finished with her dreadful task. Despite how much she must have exerted herself to slay a score of corrupted beasts and monsters, as well as a couple demons, she seemed to be still brimming with essence. Master Jet would be able to join the main line of the first irregular company soon. The flanking force that Sonny had been holding back, meanwhile, seemed to be all but destroyed by his own efforts and the devastating fall of the tyrant. What little remained of it was currently being torn to pieces by the furious confrontation of the jade beetle and sky tide. All in all, the situation was not too terrible. The scales definitely tilted in the favor of humans now. They just had to capitalize on that advantage. Running terribly low on essence, battered and exhausted, Sonny let out a silent groan. Damn it, damnation. This is just day 2, the tide of the battle had turned. The terrifying confrontation between the tyrant of the Stone Hive and Sky Tide of the White Feather Clan went on. But now, the eerily beautiful Jade Beetle was clearly losing. On the battlefield itself, the force of abominations trying to attack the irregulars from the rear had been decimated under the cover of unnatural darkness. The corrupted lieutenants leading the main assault had been dealt with by Soul Reaper, although the human soldiers had been feeling hints of despair just a few minutes ago. Now, a new strength filled their bodies. Fight, we can do this. Crush the bugs. The irregulars knew that the moments when hope finally shined from the distance were often the most dangerous, so they did not allow themselves to relax and fought with fierce determination. Then something strange happened. The veil of darkness enveloping the lower part of the slope suddenly flowed forward and drowned a large swath of nightmare creatures assaulting their defensive line from the flank. Immediately, frenzied shrieks of the abominations resounded from it, only to stop abruptly in the cracking noise of splitting chitin. At the same time, Soul Reaper Jet broke through the ranks of the hive and joined the crescent battle formation. Suddenly reassured, the humans fought with doubled ferocity. The effect was even more pronounced for the members of one of the cohorts, who could actually see through the unnatural darkness thanks to Kim's unique aspect. Luster, who had lost count of the number of repulsive bugs he had killed or wounded with his halberd, threw a quick glance to the flank of the defensive line and almost stumbled. What? Out there in the darkness, their captain was dancing between the abominations, slaying one after another with graceful strikes of a long and somber blade. His swordsmanship was elegant and exquisite. However, what stunned the young man was not the battle skill of their commanding officer, but the armor Captain Sunless was wearing, as well as the shape and color of his odachi. That's Mongrel's armor and sword. Luster's eyes widened. Don't tell me. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense. Influenced by the death wish, enchantment that spread to those who witnessed Sonny fight, an intense fire ignited in Luster's heart. His eyes gleamed, and he threw himself into the battle with burning determination. More, I need to kill more. After learning their captain's true identity, Luster was extremely inspired. He had given up on his goal not long after the clash with the Stone Hive started, but now it did not seem as impossible anymore. I must vanquish these abominable bugs. If I kill enough, I might get a hug from Master Winter. Oh, I can't wait. Similarly, although, of course, in a different manner, the other members of the cohort experienced the bolstering effect of the dying wish as well. All of them fought like devils, earning themselves a fearsome reputation among the irregulars. And the man who had made it all possible was currently cursing his fate. Damn crap, curse it all. Surrounded by a swarm of nightmare creatures, Sonny fought while feeling extremely aggrieved. Things were not going great for him. He was extremely tired, bruised and battered, and worst of all, his essence was running dry. Keeping the shadow sword tangible was eating through what little he had left with frightening speed, but the worst offender was the shadow lantern. A divine memory was as gluttonous as one would think. On top of that, there were the dying wish and the mantle of the underworld. Pretty soon, he would be completely spent. Sadly, he could not dismiss the veil of shadows, since doing that would reveal his identity as Mongrel to a lot of strangers. The members of his own cohort had already seen enough, most likely, but he somewhat trusted them to keep his secret. Due to the fact that Sonny had kept them alive through several dire battles, the bonds of loyalty were already forming between the 6 soldiers and their captain. He had to dismiss something, though. The first thing to go was the dying wish. Although it brought benefit to his soldiers, and, to a lesser degree, to all irregulars, he simply could not allow the expenditure of essence that both the death wish and the underworld armament required. The next memory to go was the mantle of the underworld itself. Sonny was reluctant and more than a little scared to continue his fight without a suit of armor, but there was little he could do. Without sufficient essence to feed the living stone, many cracks appeared on the stone-like onyx surface of the mantle. Not only had it lost some of its protective quality, but there was a risk that the ancient armor would receive too much damage and succumb entirely. It was also growing heavy without the effects of the feather of truth, enchantment. He just had to fight carefully and concentrate on dodging the enemy attacks from now on. Even if he made a mistake or two, a couple wounds were not going to kill him. Thankfully, there were not as many enemies left around him as at the start of the battle. Once the most damning evidence was gone, Sonny had no reason to keep the shadow lantern active, so he dismissed it as well. With no enchantments to keep powered and the small amount of essence he received back by dismissing these memories, he could maintain the shape of his sword for a bit longer. Sonny killed a few more enemies, barely avoided a stream of acid that one of the monstrous insects spat, and retaliated by neatly severing its body in half. When is this going to end, damn it? A few seconds later, his odachi turned hazy and then dissipated into a shadow. Sonny was at his limit. Please gods, let it stop, let it stop, let it stop. Arg, damnation, this is such crap. What the hell? What kind of damned situation is this? With nothing better to do, he grabbed a severed chitin blade of one of the abominations and used it as a makeshift sword. At that moment, the veil of shadows created by the shadow lantern finally dissipated. The irregulars saw a stunning image. Wearing no armor and only clad in a torn black bodysuit, Captain Sunless hammered a severed limb of an enemy into the carapace of a fallen abomination. The white chitin split, and the creature let out a painful shriek. With indescribable fury and resentment burning in his eyes, the young master bared his teeth and punched the beast with his naked fist, crushing its head. The veteran soldiers shuddered. Such righteous wrath, Master Sunless must really hate nightmare creatures, huh? Sonny, meanwhile, kicked the fallen beast away and let out a trembling breath. Phew, that was close. How did I even survive that last attack? At that moment, something imperceptible changed on the battlefield. The stone hive, which had been unified and deviously intelligent before, suddenly seemed to lose much of its coordination. At the same time, the spell suddenly whispered into Sonny's ear. You have slain a corrupted tyrant, remnant of the Jade Queen. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory. He blinked. And what? What had just happened? It seemed that the persistent corrosion, which the cruel sight had learned to reflect thanks to the wormvein's miasma, turned out to be more powerful than Sonny had thought. Much more likely than that, though, was that it just happened to finish off the mighty abomination after it had been brought to the very edge of death by Sky Tide, but before she could deal the killing blow. What were the chances of that? 1 in a million. Standing above the dead fallen beast, Sonny grinned. I guess I'm lucky today. After the death of the tyrant, the battle did not last long. The stone hive had already lost many soldiers, as well as its most powerful champions. Without the guiding sentience of its ruler, the lesser creatures seemed to lack most of their intelligence and coordination. Feeling this weakness, the exhausted irregulars advanced and slaughtered them without a hint of hesitation. With Soul Reaper rampaging at the front of the formation, the number of the monstrous insects quickly dwindled. Then, Saint Tyrus joined the battle and more or less wiped out the remaining abominations single-handedly. Sky Tide seemed to have received several wounds in her fight with the remnant of the Jade Queen, but it did not slow her much. Moving between the giant insects like wind, Almost too swift to be seen with a naked eye, she disposed of all the remaining nightmare creatures in mere seconds. Her saber cut through their impregnable white carapaces as if they were made out of water. Just like that, suddenly, silence settled over the summit of the mountain. The soldiers looked at each other in confusion, struggling to believe that that bloody battle ended so abruptly. Then, when the sweet understanding dawned on them, the irregulars lowered themselves to the ground with relieved sighs, drained of all strength. Everyone was too exhausted to move and needed a few minutes to rest and collect their thoughts. Tired smiles appeared on their faces. Sonny found a patch of rock that was not covered by fetid blue lymph and plopped on it as well. He was utterly spent. As the excitement of the battle died down, his thoughts turned slow and lazy. I'm hurt all over. He felt a pleasant satisfaction. Not only had they won a hard fight, but he also received a fair share of shadow fragments. Better yet, there was a transcendent memory of the fifth tier he was yet to take a look at. For a moment, he wanted to summon the runes immediately, but then gave up on that idea. He was too tired to think properly right now. The memory could wait until the cohort was safely back aboard the Rhino. For now, Sonny was content to just sit on the ground and rest. As he did, his shadows naturally took a look around. The summit of the mountain had been transformed. The snow had melted or turned into blue sludge. The slope itself was littered with hundreds of dead nightmare creatures and deep cracks. The gate still pulsed with darkness at the very peak, but one side of the deep schism it filled had collapsed and crumbled down. Further down the slope, the massive carcass of the jade beetle lay on the cold stones. It seemed that the final stage of its battle with Saint Tyrus had taken them away from the battlefield. As a result, it was now pretty far from the stretch of the slope where Sonny had fought with the flanking force of the hive. Only corpses of awakened and fallen creatures remained. Some were cut apart, some were torn apart by the shadow tentacles, and many were utterly crushed by the fall of their ruler. Of course, the irregulars did not know that, since that area had been covered by the veil of darkness summoned by the shadow lantern. To them, it all looked like Sonny's doing. Their whispers entered his ears. "Gods, look over there. Is that where Master Sunless fought? So many dead bugs, wait, what the hell? Why are these corpses so mangled? It's like they were put through a meat grinder. I mean, it does not even look like they were cut by a blade. It's more like he ripped them apart and crushed them with his bare hands. He did you not see him at the end? His weapon and armor must have been destroyed in the fight, so he just tore a leg off a fallen abomination and then beat the bastard to death with it. And then, I swear to the gods, I saw it myself. He stood there and smiled as though someone gave him the best present in the world. I think he really hates nightmare creatures. His expression before that, so much anger, so much resentment. It looked, I don't know, personal. Maybe there's a tragic story there. No wonder Soul Reaper went to the trouble of personally recruiting him. What kind of devil is that kid? Sonny blinked. Had he really smiled? Oh, that must have been the moment when he received the transcendent memory. He had indeed lost composure and grinned like an idiot for a few moments there. In any case, none of these soldiers seemed to have connected him to Mongrel. They just thought that he was some kind of monster with a personal grudge against nightmare creatures. His own cohort, meanwhile. Sonny turned slightly and caught sight of Luster, who was staring at him with an intense expression. The young man's eyes seemed extremely bitter for some reason. "What's up with that clown?" At that moment, someone approached and sat down near him. Sonny turned around and saw Winter, who stared at him with a nonchalant expression. "Why?" Before he could finish the thought, she suddenly grinned and pulled him into a very tight hug. "You did great, little devil. Let's be friends." Soon the irregulars caught their breaths and started moving. Saint Tyrus departed after approaching Sonny to thank him for his contribution in slaying the tyrant, her voice cordial and stern as usual. This time, however, it almost sounded partial. Since the threat of the stone hive had been eliminated, a signal was sent to the First Army that the path was clear. Not too long after that, a long column of vehicles appeared on the road that stretched far below, on the other side of the mountain. One of the divisions was proceeding with haste to its next destination. The irregulars themselves were busy with collecting soul shards from the slain abominations. A dozen heavy loaders arrived to drag the carcass of the remnant of the Jade Queen away. Even in death, a corrupted tyrant was extremely valuable. Its impenetrable carapace and other parts had a lot of uses for advanced spelltech applications. Sunny would not be surprised if some of the Jade Beetle ended up being used to bolster the defenses of one of the siege capitals. Most likely Falcon Scott itself. After some time, Master Jet left for the base camp where the APCs were parked in order to contact the Army command. Since there was nothing for Sunny to do at the summit of the mountain, he followed her and climbed into the Rhino to rest. There, sitting on his comfortable bed, Sunny finally summoned the runes. A transcendent memory, let's see. Soon his eyes gleamed. The runes shimmered in the air. Memory, Sin of Solace. Memory rank, Transcendent. Memory tier, V. Memory type, Weapon. Looking at ethereal weave of symbols, Sunny felt a cold shiver running down his spine. A weapon. The Sin of Solace was the third transcendent memory he had received. However, it was of a higher tier than both the Undying Chain and the Dying Wish combined. More than that, it was a weapon, something that could express its power much more directly than an armor or a charm. Something that he desperately needed here, in the cold expanse of Antarctica. A weapon bestowed by the slaying of a corrupted tyrant had to be truly powerful. Holding his breath, he continued to study the runes. Memory description. This blade is a whisper of Ariel, the demon of dread, who turned a beautiful monster into a queen and gave her a sinister gift of forbidden knowledge. Sunny tilted his head, suddenly excited. The demon of dread, another demon, there are 5 of them I know of now. Demon of fate, demon of hope, demon of choice, demon of dread. Wait, who was the 5th one? He strained his memory for a while, and then scratched the back of his head. Oh right, the demon of oblivion, how did I forget? Sunny pondered about the fact that the demon of oblivion was so forgettable for a bit. Then, he slightly shook his head. In any case, if this memory was connected to a demon, it had to be immensely powerful. His heart started to beat faster. Memory enchantments, sinister whisper, perfect jade, omen of dread, hideous truth, cursed. Sunny blinked. Wait, what cursed? What did that mean, cursed? Somewhat disturbed, he decided to read the description of the last enchantment first. Soon, an ugly expression appeared on his face. Cursed enchantment description. This blade slowly drives its wielder mad. What the hell? His new shiny transcendent weapon had come with side effects. What kind of crap is this? Since when do memories have flaws? Mad, it wants to drive me mad. We'll see who goes mad first, damn it. Glancing at the runes with resentment, Sunny decided to study the other enchantments before coming to conclusions. Sinister Whisper, enchantment description. This blade can deal both physical damage and mental damage to those that it cuts, destroying not only their bodies but also their minds. The mental damage persists like a curse, even after a single cut. He grunted. How insidious. Mental attacks were almost as rare as soul attacks, and equally as hard to defend against. There was something terrifying about them, too, especially to those beings that were very hard to kill or nearly immortal. After all, what was the point of living if one's sanity was gone? A blade like that, truly, it would have been a bane of someone like the eternal chain lords of the Kingdom of Hope. If only the damned memory did not deal the same mental damage to the wielder. Sonny grimaced and then continued to read the runes. Perfect jade, enchantment description. This blade is carved from a piece of sublime jade, and as such is sharp and durable beyond logic and reason. Straightforward. Omen of dread, enchantment description. A faint remnant of Ariel's presence lingers on this blade, striking terror into the hearts of all beings. Sonny frowned. Another mental attack enchantment, but this one is passive and affects an area. Not bad, should work wonders when Nightmare is around, too. Finally, the last one made him frown. Hideous truth, enchantment description. The more the wielder's sanity is shattered, the more powerful this blade becomes. It bestows revelations of madness on those who give in to its will. Sonny sighed. Damnation. So basically, this already formidable weapon could grow many times more terrifying, but only if the person wielding it went completely insane. Conveniently, the sin of solace also drove anyone who wielded it to madness, thus providing an easy solution to unlocking the potential of the hideous truth. What am I supposed to do with this thing? And what does that mean, give in to its will? Does this cursed sword have a will of its own? While Sonny liked to joke that he was a bit crazy, he did not really want to turn into a raving lunatic. He lingered for a few minutes, then took a deep breath and summoned his new memory into existence. Soon, a beautiful Shunshu giant appeared in his hands. It was a straight, thin double-edged greatsword with a narrow guard and a graceful blade that gradually tapered to a sharp tip. Despite the fact that it was almost as long as Sonny was tall, the sin of solace surprisingly did not weigh much. In fact, it was as light as a feather. Its hilt was carved out of black obsidian, and the blade itself was stark white, with beautiful patterns etched on it. Despite the description of the perfect jade enchantment, it did not seem rigid as stone. Instead, it was both hard and flexible in perfect proportion. A sword such as this was nimble and swift, but also capable of dealing devastating damage. Despite its breathtaking beauty, however, as soon as Sonny touched the cool obsidian hilt, it was as though someone whispered into his ear. He shivered and turned around, only to find that there was nothing behind him. The whisper, however, did not disappear. It continued to flow from somewhere just out of reach, too quiet to discern any words for now. Sonny felt that if he just concentrated hard enough, he would be able to understand what the rustling voice was saying. And it was important, very important to understand it. There was a meaning to them that he just had to know. Had to. Before Sonny noticed, his body was covered in cold sweat. He stared at the sin of solace with a complicated expression, and then summoned the undying chain. As soon as the bleak armor wrapped itself around his body, the insidious whisper seemed to grow weaker. Sonny was only slightly obsessed with listening to it now. Ah, good. The chains of longing, enchantment of the transcendent armor provided him with a high protection against mind attacks, and the cursed attribute of the beautiful giant seemed to be just that. A strange and sinister mind attack aimed at the sword's own wielder. Which meant that Saint, who was completely immune to mind attacks, would be able to use the jade sword without any problem. Sonny was sufficiently certain what he would be able to withstand the tantalizing whispers if need be, as well. It was a small price to pay for being able to wield such a frightening, transcendent weapon. If push comes to shove, I can afford to lose a bit of sanity too. I mean, what's wrong with going a little mad? Been there, done that. Dismissing the beautiful sword, Sonny breathed a sigh of relief. The insidious whispers assaulting his mind disappeared, leaving only a lingering sense of chill and unease behind. The pressure of the call was already enough to drive a person insane. Adding the curse of the sin of solace to this burden was not for the weak of heart. Well, whatever, I'll just let Saint use it for now. He was impressed by the cursed blade, though. Its fundamental properties were already fearsome enough, considering that this transcendent weapon's sharpness and durability were further enhanced by the perfect jade enchantment. It also synergizes well with Nightmare's Dreadlord attribute and the Mantle of Fear ability. What made it so alluring to Sunny was the mental damage it dealt, though. Mind attacks were an insidious thing. While not as obviously destructive as more straightforward elemental damage types, and not as universally deadly and hard to defend against as soul attacks, they possessed one frightening quality. The more sentience a being possessed, the more that being stood to be damaged by a mind attack. What it meant was that while lesser nightmare creatures, beasts, and monsters would not be as susceptible to the sinister whisper, the truly dangerous foes, demons, devils, tyrants, terrors, and humans would suffer terribly from it. And since those were the enemies Sunny was wary of the most, the Sin of Solace was a perfect tool to satisfy his needs. I just have to be careful not to suffer terribly myself. But even if he did, at least he would be reaping the benefits of the hideous truth. Sunny felt that the cursed sword would become truly terrifying if its wielder managed to unlock that strange enchantment. At its full force, maybe the Sin of Solace would be powerful enough to strike down even great nightmare creatures. Or supreme humans. With a wistful sigh, Sunny decided to check his progress in other areas, since he already had the runes summoned. Shadow Fragments, 870/4000. Not bad, after being stuck at 744/4000 for half a year. He had gained more than 100 fragments in just 2 days. If this continued, Sunny would become a tyrant in a not-so-distant future. Of course, if he continued to fight at that intensity every day, he would also probably be dead by then. Somewhat reassured, he shifted his gaze to the mantle of the underworld. Vanquished Foes, 4555/6000. The monumental task of satisfying the requirement of the Prince of the Underworld enchantment was nearing its final stage. With how many nightmare creatures ran rampant in Antarctica, Sunny would certainly be able to complete it soon. Now that his identity as Mongrel was, most likely, known to the members of his cohort, there should be no problem wearing the mantle more often. He still did not know how the onyx armor would grow after the limit was reached, but hoped to see something incredible. Then Sunny concentrated on his shadows, starting with Saint. Shadow Fragments, 101/200. Saint was already halfway to becoming a saint, or a transcendent demon, to be more precise. He could not even imagine how powerful she would be once he collected enough memories or echoes to feed to his loyal knight. Still, 100 or so ascended memories was not a small amount. Luckily, he could also use memories of lesser ranks, although the process would be much slower in that case. Finally, he read the runes describing Nightmare. Shadow Fragments, 14/300. He sighed. To be honest, Sunny had not been very diligent about feeding his steed. For some reason, the Black Courser required much more fragments to ascend than Saint had needed. Maybe because he was already a terror, or maybe because Saint had come from a race created by Nether, the Prince of the Underworld. In any case, Sunny felt that helping her become transcendent was more important than elevating Nightmare to an ascended terror, especially considering that his terror ability, Dream Curse, was still locked. And speaking about that ability, at least there had been more progress on that front. Nightmares required, 112/1000. His steed had already subjugated more than 100 nightmares, both making himself stronger and growing closer to unlocking the Dream Curse. Of course, that task was still far from being over, but Sunny had a feeling that there would be a lot of progress soon. Antarctica was in the throes of a cataclysm that had become known as the Chain of Nightmares, after all. It was bound to breed a lot of them. Better yet, up until now, The black steed had been limited to only subjugating nightmares of masters, simply because awakened humans did not dream. Awakened nightmare creatures did, however, which meant that Nightmare would be able to plant seeds of fear into their souls, and then visit the dreams of those abominations that had survived the encounter to harvest them. Maybe I should let him loose more often. And that was that, more or less. His own shadow fragments, that of Saint and Nightmare, the prince of the underworld enchantment and the dream curse. These were the things he needed to concentrate on. Then there were other things. His arsenal of memories, the power of his cohort, and the equipment of its members. Oh, and he also had to survive somehow. I probably will. Sonny had made a lot of progress, but there was a lot more progress still to be made. Luckily, Antarctica was just the place to make it. It had an inexhaustible reserve of nightmare creatures of all kinds, with numerous new ones soon to arrive. As long as one could stay alive, there were countless opportunities for growth. Master Jet had been right. This campaign was going to shift the balance of power across all of humanity. Many new champions would emerge. Many renowned warriors would become even stronger. Many would die. Thinking about that, Sonny suddenly felt somber. Now, he was even more convinced that the great clans would not be able to stay away from the chain of nightmares for long. He just had to make the best of it before they arrived then. 1,000 duels undefeated. He even went against Morgan of Valor before ascending. No way. What do you mean, no way? The recordings are all over the network, dude. No, Luster is right. I don't know much about the dreamscape, but it is a fact that he contained a manifesting gate as an awakened. Alone. I also heard that he is a bastard son of a saint from the House of Night, maybe even of Nightwalker himself. Actually, some say that he was created in a secret government laboratory from the DNA of powerful nightmare creatures. But the research was abandoned, with all records destroyed, because he was the only test subject who did not go completely mad. I've heard that he is a woman, though. Does he look like a woman, you idiot? Well, now that you say it, he is strangely petite. Has anyone seen Captain undressed? Belle, did you get hit in the head during the last battle? Keep your voices down, you'll wake him up. Already awake, Sonny was laying on his comfortable bed and listening to his subordinates gossip at the front of the steadily moving rhino. His expression was hard to describe. These fools. He had expected that much from Luster, but Kimmy, not to mention Belle. Belle was supposed to be their reasonable senior, damn it. With a sigh, Sonny rose, threw a neutral glance at the suddenly quiet trio, and then went to the kitchen to make some coffee. He poured himself a cup of the fragrant drink, added some synthetic sugar to it, then sat down in the lounge area of the APC and took a delighted sip. Throughout all of it, 3 pairs of eyes were following his every move. Sonny shifted slightly, then looked at them in return. What, is there something on my suit? His black bodysuit had already repaired the tears it received in the battle against the stone hive. Its smart fabric was truly something else. The more Sonny wore it, the more he understood how well designed this unusual uniform was. One could argue whether it was dapper or not, but overall, he was extremely satisfied with his new equipment. Hearing his question, Kim and Luster suddenly looked away with furtive expressions. No, it's nothing. You look great today, Captain. Sonny raised an eyebrow. Belle, meanwhile, continued to stare at him with a strange expression. For some reason, Sonny suddenly felt an impulse to cover his chest with an arm. He frowned. Anything you want to ask? The swordsman simply nodded and smiled. Yeah, Captain, are you mongrel? Luster and Kim flinched and looked at him with horror. Sonny, meanwhile, scowled. Who are you calling a mongrel bastard? Bell shook his head. No, I mean, are you Lord Mongrel? You know that guy. Damn, as expected. Truth be told, the moment the question had been asked, He had no choice but to answer. Sonny just stalled a little to collect his thoughts. He shrugged. "Oh yeah, that's me." Then Sonny took a sip of his coffee with an absolutely nonchalant expression. Luster and Kimmy, meanwhile, were staring at him in shock. Their eyes were as wide as saucers. For a few long moments, there was nothing but dead silence. Sonny enjoyed his drink for a bit and then scratched the back of his head. "Ah, but don't tell anyone. It's a secret. I wasn't really supposed to become known to the public, you know." Their expressions slowly changed. A hint of grave understanding appeared in their eyes. The three looked at each other, and then Kim resolutely nodded. "Of course, Captain, we will keep silent about who you really are. We'll tell Samara, Quentin, and Dorn, too. Don't worry." Sonny nodded with satisfaction. Isn't it great to have such understanding minions? Of course, he had no idea what it was that they thought they understood. But that was the beauty of it. He did not need to. The best and most convincing lies were those that people built in their heads themselves. Human imagination was a wild thing. Whatever idiotic theory his soldiers decided to believe, be it that their captain was a secret love child of a famous saint or a product of a forbidden government experiment, it was all good with him. The point was that they would keep it to themselves. Just like that, a few more people learned that he was mongrel. Sonny felt a bit sad about that fact. On the bright side, it seemed that he would have no problem summoning the mantle of the underworld in the future, at least now when the cohort acted independently of other human forces. Luster, too, was looking at him with a newfound reverence. If there was one inconvenient thing about the revelation that Captain Sunless was, in fact, the famous Lord Mongrel, it was that Belle kept throwing strange glances at Sonny. "What the hell?" With a friendly smile, Sonny took his cup of coffee and returned to the back of the Rhino. Climbing back onto the bed, he then took out his communicator. There, a new message was waiting for him. As his smile grew a little wider, Sonny concentrated on the lines of text. "Rain, hey Sonny, how are you doing? Everyone is talking about the Southern Quadrant campaign. That is where you went, right? Are you an officer now? Tell me so that I could brag about it in school. One of my classmates' sister is apparently an ace MWP pilot." She won't shut up. Stop talking about it. Anyway, are you doing well? The news says that everything is going great, but my dad seems very stressed. I don't think I've ever seen him so tense. Oh, I am doing well myself. A few kids in my class stopped coming to school, so I guess they are at the Awakened Academy now. But I am not showing any symptoms yet. I am practicing my archery and swordsmanship every day, though. You'll be proud of your pupil. Sonny reread the message a few times, then finished his coffee, grinned, and started composing a response. "Sonny, hey, an officer. Gods, who do you think I am? Of course I am. Let me tell you, I'm a captain of the most elite unit in the whole army. I have a bunch of powerful awakened under me, and a reputation so fearsome that other masters want to be my friends. The Devil of Antarctica, that's what they call me. Well, I'm sure someone does, maybe. Just yesterday, an actual saint personally expressed gratitude to me. I will probably get a medal soon, too. Oh, I am also in charge of a cutting-edge armored personnel carrier called the Rhino. You won't believe how amazing it is. Let me describe it. First of all, the initial several weeks of the Antarctica campaign were the most intense, at least for now. The divisions of the First Army steadily moved south, fighting through the swiftly growing swarms of nightmare creatures and establishing strategic encampments along the way. These encampments were going to serve as the transit points of the evacuation network soon. Moving through them, all the population of the Antarctic Center was going to be relocated to the siege capitals to await eventual salvation. The same thing, only on a much larger scale, was happening in East Antarctica, where most people of the Southern Quadrant lived. As days went by, the chain of nightmares grew more rampant. New gates manifested with increased frequency, disgorging more and more abominations into the waking world. Luckily, the burden pressing down on the First Army also grew lighter, since more and more divisions reached their destinations and entrenched themselves inside the cities that would become humanity's strongholds in the coming months. Without the need to brave the enemy-infested wilderness, the lives of the soldiers became less perilous. That was not to say that they were not terribly busy. Turning a populous city into a wartime fortress was a laborious task, too. However, no one was as busy as the first irregular company. Just like Master Jet had promised, the irregulars almost never rested. While other soldiers had specific tasks that sometimes forced them into battle with the nightmare creatures, and sometimes did not, the 7 cohorts of irregulars constantly moved between various flashpoints to douse their flames. Day after day, battle after battle. Soon, the novelty of Antarctica's sobering reality dissipated, and the endless procession of combat engagements blurred into one continuous, bloody ordeal. They were doing their job still. Not all battles were as large-scale or as dire as those in the first 2 days of the active operation. Some demanded more precision than all-out effort. Others simply had to be fought because no one else could be spared to address the situation. Tempered in this terrible crucible, Sonny and his cohort were becoming accustomed to the trials of the chain of nightmares, as well as each other. Their ability to fight as a single cohesive entity increased, finally reaching a satisfactory level. Their personal power grew, too. Sonny was not the only one who had managed to enhance his arsenal of memories. For one, with so many nightmare creatures that needed to be slaughtered, each member of the cohort acquired new combat tools. Quentin, for example, had received a beautiful suit of plate armor for killing a fallen officer of the Stone Hive. Just like the carapaces of the monstrous insects, it was pure white and incredibly durable. Luster managed to acquire a charm that was supposed to increase his luck, even if no one could really tell whether it actually worked or not. Samara was now wearing a chameleon cape that blended into the environment and masked her position. Others were using new memories, too. Armed with them, the cohort managed to survive these perilous weeks without suffering any casualties. They swiftly racked up kills and contribution points, as well as soul shards and reputation among the soldiers of the First Army. However, their fearsome reputation paled in comparison to that of Mongrel, who was slowly turning into somewhat of an urban myth. Sonny had had no plans of unleashing his weird alter ego again so soon, but the circumstances forced him to make a different decision. There was just too much for him to do. Often, several missions of utmost importance appeared simultaneously, and since he could not be in 2 places at the same time, he sent Nightmare and Saint to take care of the easier ones instead. This approach turned out to be surprisingly effective. Armed with the Sin of Solace, which synergized extremely well with both of them, his shadows had become a real menace on the battlefield. They were also able to traverse the mountainous terrain of the Antarctic Center with great speed, allowing Sonny to dispatch them to complete missions that required speed above all else. Of course, these missions had to be on the lower spectrum of hardship. A transcendent weapon or not, Saint and Nightmare could not compare to the power of the cohort itself, especially since he led it personally. So while Sonny and his soldiers dealt with the most dangerous tasks, Mongrel popped up here and there, without any discernible pattern, appearing from nowhere and disappearing without a trace after dealing devastating damage to the nightmare creatures and leaving only severed corpses behind. Suffice it to say, Saint's popularity among the rank and file of the First Army grew explosively. The Guardian Angel of Antarctica, that title, coined by a random network journalist, was spoken by them more and more often, jokingly at first, but then a bit less so. Sonny, meanwhile, finally earned his own nickname. Unsurprisingly, he was being called Devil now, or, infuriatingly, little devil. The latter one, however, was only used by the other captains of the irregulars. No one else dared to speak it to his face, or behind his back, really, considering that the rumor that the young master was always watching and listening quickly spread through the army. Of course, not everything went well for the human force. The First Army experienced several painful setbacks. More soldiers fell, and more were critically wounded. The technical equipment was starting to grow less and less reliable as time went by, even if the most critical pieces worked as intended due to expensive spelltech countermeasures. It was getting harder and harder for the awakened to find a safe place to sleep without being whisked away by the call. Worst of all, however, was the effect that the chain of nightmares exerted on mundane humans. Nephi's had once told Sonny that each person infected by the spell carried a small seed of nightmare in their soul, and that those of them who failed to pass the first trial became a category, one gate themselves. The chain of nightmares increased the rate of gate manifestations manifold, and that rate, terribly, spread to mundane humans as well. Not only was there an anomalously high amount of young people falling prey to the spell in Antarctica, but also, for the first time in half a century, people outside the usual age of infestation started to succumb to the first nightmares en masse, as well. Which meant that, just like during the emergence of the first generation, no one was safe. Anyone could become infected, fail the trial of the spell, and turn into a murderous nightmare creature. The people locked inside the siege capitals, those being relocated through the evacuation corridors, even the soldiers themselves. A tense and fearful atmosphere slowly settled over Antarctica. Chilling darkness veiled Antarctica like a burial shroud. The twilight of the dusk had finally succumbed to the inevitable advent of the cruelly lasting absence of light, and the long night had come to the southern quadrant, pregnant with countless horrors. This night was going to last for many months, and by the end of it, who knew if any of the humans it embraced would still be alive? How many of them would be lucky enough to see the light of day again? Sonny had never experienced a night quite like that. The sun was gone, and the empty sky was full of brilliant stars. The pale visage of the moon lingered among them from time to time, coming and going as it pleased. Despite how dark and cold the world had become, it was strangely beautiful. Back in the alloy jungle of the northern quadrant siege capital, stars were rare guests. Light pollution kept them away. Similarly, there were no stars shining upon the cursed expanse of the forgotten shore. Antarctica was different. Despite the coming of the night, it only grew more dazzling. The stars, the moon, and the breathtaking tapestry of the aurora australis that shimmered above them as ethereal shades of green, blue, purple, and red flowed into each other. All of it was very beautiful. However, that beauty hid oppressive horror. Dread, that's the word to describe it. This is a land of dread. Sonny and his cohort were walking through the encampment of the first evacuation army, their armor covered in dents and painted by the blood of the nightmare creatures they had recently killed. The tense and tired soldiers hurried to get out of their way, throwing intense looks at the irregulars. "Look, it's the devils, they're here. Thank the gods." Recently, they had become a comforting sight for the rank and file of the First Army. Wherever irregulars appeared, problems seemed to disappear, and the number of casualties drastically fell. Of course, these victories had a cost. It's just that the soldiers weren't the ones paying it. With a grim expression on his face, Sonny glanced at Dorn, who was limping and seemed barely able to walk. The giant man's face was pale and covered in cold sweat. He had received a severe wound in the last battle. Even with Quentin's help, Dorn was going to be out of commission for at least several days, which meant that they would be short a man should a new mission arrive. The campaign was still on track, but it was getting more dire with each day. The air in the encampment was full of fear and tension. More and more nightmare creatures poured into the waking world, and now that darkness reigned Antarctica unopposed, any area that was not illuminated by powerful spotlights could be hiding a deadly threat. Even then, the spotlights tended to flicker and break down spontaneously, which made even artificial light unreliable. People were constantly on edge and afraid of every shadow. After all, most couldn't see through them like Sunny. Even worse, danger lurked not only in the darkness outside, but also inside the fortified encampments. The spell was spreading through the ranks of mundane humans like a plague, and anyone could turn into a rampaging monster if left alone for too long. There was no real safety anywhere. If things are like that after just 1 month, how are we going to last the whole year? Shaking his head, Sonny looked ahead and caught a glimpse of the rhino. His eyelids suddenly grew heavy. He really needed rest. Despite the glum atmosphere in the camp, objectively, things were going reasonably well for the field army dispatched to the Antarctic Center. It had already advanced almost all the way to the southern edge of the narrow landmass. All but one division, the one Sonny and his cohort were assigned to, had already reached their destinations and were in the process of converting them into siege capitals. Evacuation networks had been established, with fortified transit outposts placed near the strategic points. Constant patrols maintained protected corridors for the armored convoys to ferry the civilians from smaller settlements into the handful of human strongholds. Up north, the relocation was already in full swing. Here in the south, however, it was only starting. Still, the first phase of the operation was well on its way. Maybe we'll get to relax behind a thick wall of a siege capital soon, too. Climbing into the rhino, Sonny glanced at Kim. Status. She studied her military communicator. Army Command designated this camp as a green zone. Last check was 13 minutes ago. He nodded. A green zone was one with no gates close enough to affect the dream realm anchors of the awakened. People could sleep safely within its confines. Okay, Quentin, tend to Dorn. Kimmy, Luster, Samara, and Belle enjoy the first sleep shift. I'll stand watch until you guys return. They nodded and soon disappeared inside the sleeping pods. Quentin got busy dealing with Dorn's injury, using both his aspect and an extensive medkit. Sonny, meanwhile, walked over to the command and communication suite and sat behind a console. He lingered for a moment and then summoned his runes. Shadow Fragments, 1332/4000. Shadow Fragments, 133/200. Nightmares Required, 209/1000. And finally, Vanquished Foes, 5523/6000. He had achieved a lot in the past month. So much, in fact, that exhaustion had seeped into his very bones. Sonny had long lost count of how many nightmare creatures he had slain, but it had to be a couple of thousands at least. Even more if he counted those that Saint and Nightmare had hunted down. Mantle of the Underworld will probably be first. Even though he could not wear the onyx armor in every battle, its counter was swiftly approaching the limit. Sonny sighed and then dismissed the runes. Almost simultaneously, the symbol of an incoming communication appeared on the console's screen. He closed his eyes for a moment. Looks like a new mission is here. After all, a moment later, a familiar face appeared on the screen. Despite the pressure of leading the first irregular company into the meat grinder of the Southern Quadrant campaign, Master Jet looked relaxed and at ease, like she always did. No, actually, she almost seemed to look better than how she had back in the safe haven of the NQSC. It was as though the exhaustion that everyone in Antarctica felt could not touch her. The perpetual dark circles under her eyes were gone, and her whole presence appeared strangely invigorated. Sonny had a suspicion of why. Soul Reaper flashed him a bright smile. Hey Sonny, how is it going? He simply nodded. We cleared that fallen nest. Dorn was wounded though. he'll need a few days to recover. In the past month, his relationship with Master Jet had gradually changed. They grew a bit closer and more familiar with each other. That sense of camaraderie could only be forged by fighting side by side in numerous battles, and was only enhanced by the exceedingly rare background they shared. Wasn't it funny to see two outskirt rats leading the elite government awakened into battle? However, at the same time, after observing Soul Reaper in combat more, Sunny felt that he had come to understand the nature of her flaw, and it was a grim one for sure. A long time ago, in a different lifetime, almost, before even the Forgotten Shore, Sunny had heard from Teacher Julius that Master Jet was feared by many awakened. As the old man had put it, her problematic personality destroyed any chance she might have had of ever becoming a saint. Actually, the exact words he had used were, "Who would want to help a psychopathic killer become a saint?" Later, Sunny had learned more about the unspoken rules of the awakened society, and came to believe that these rumors were just a pretense to justify the suppression of the sovereigns. A product of the contempt-proud legacies, felt toward a clanless nobody from the outskirts who dared to become stronger than them, and refused to bend the knee to their power. But now he was not so sure. Sunny had seen that Jet possessed a bizarre ability to absorb the soul essence of those that she killed. He had also witnessed her powerful, but fractured core that constantly leaked essence like a broken vessel. Later, he also observed that she seemed to lack the ability to naturally regenerate essence, as all awakened could. And so, he now suspected that Soul Reaper's flaw forced her to constantly pursue murder. It seemed that killing was the only way for her to prevent her fractured core from becoming lifeless and empty. That would actually explain a lot of things, from the true reason she had chosen to come to Antarctica to why a girl from the outskirts, someone who had never been treated like a human by the government, would decide to become a dedicated government operative. Working for the authorities might not have been the most glamorous job, but if there was one thing it did not lack, it was an endless amount of targets that had to be killed. So maybe those who treated Soul Reaper Jet like a person obsessed with killing were not wrong. They were just mistaken about the reason for her morbid obsession. Which posed a question: could he really trust her? What would happen if Soul Reaper's essence was running low and Sunny was the only one around? If he was correct in his suspicion, of course. While Sunny was thinking about that, Master Jet grinned and waved her hand in front of the camera. And it was a strange charm. No, actually, it was just a mundane piece of jewelry. The thing looked like a golden circle with 4 stars engraved on it, beautiful filigree surrounding them, and a purple ribbon attached to the top. What the hell is that? Noticing his confusion, she shook her head. God, Sonny, don't you know what that thing is? This is the Transcendent Star of Valor, the highest military decoration one can receive. It's your medal, fool. I finally managed to get the Army Command to issue it. Sunny blinked. Oh, that's great. Master Jet let out an exasperated sigh. It comes with a very sizable contribution point reward, too. Instantly, his expression livened. Oh, that's great. Finally satisfied, Soul Reaper nodded. It took some convincing to make happen. Anyway, I'll hold on to it until we meet in person. About that, plans changed a little, so you'll have to complete one more mission before that happens. Ah, but don't worry. This one is a calm one, so your man will have plenty of time to recover. Sunny stared at her with a dubious expression. Master Jet summoned the map of the Antarctic Center and highlighted several points on it. The division you're with is not going to proceed further south, since there are no big population centers there. However, there is a very important research installation at the southernmost point of the landmass. It's about 400 kilometers away from your current position. Sunny studied the map. The Antarctic Center resembled a gargantuan snake that sprawled across the ocean, and the installation Jet mentioned was situated at the very tip of its tail. What about it? She shrugged. Your mission is to reach the installation, secure the VIP currently residing there, and bring him back to the nearest siege capital. There is a garrison of local awakened commanded by a master at the installation, too. They will be responsible for evacuating the regular staff and scientists. You can choose to go back on your own, but that would be a jerk move, considering that they are expecting reinforcements to help them make the journey. Sunny thought for a bit, then nodded. Sounds easy. Yeah, no way. Something bad is definitely going to happen. Master Jet smiled. It does, doesn't it? In any case, after that is done, we will probably remain within the walls of siege capitals for a long time and finally have time to rest. Good luck. The next day, Sunny and his cohort separated from the battered division. The mass of vehicles and soldiers marched down the broad highway, heading to a large city that was situated behind the mountain peaks to the east. The Rhino, meanwhile, continued south. 400 kilometers. How long do you think it will take us to reach the research installation? Sunny was currently in the cabin of the APC, leaning on a bulkhead as he looked ahead. Luster glanced at him from the pilot's seat and shrugged hesitantly. Hard to say, sir. The terrain here is really rough, and we'll need to climb over many mountains before reaching the coastal plain. There are some old roads here and there, with tunnels that can serve as convenient shortcuts, but since no one took care of them for half a century, it's mostly a stone labyrinth. So, several days at the least. Maybe even a week if we want to be really careful, and lower the risk of stumbling into a horde of nightmare creatures. He hesitated for a few moments, and then added, Of course, I can get us there in a day if we leave the mountains and drive along the coastal thoroughfare. Since most of the Antarctic center was mountainous in nature, moving across its expanse with speed was somewhat of a problem. It would have been much faster by air, but no one was suicidal enough to use an aircraft in these circumstances. The reason was very simple. It was impossible to load enough armor on a flying vehicle. Not only would its electronics and navigation be swiftly fried by the interference of the gates, but even worse than that, countless nightmare creatures in a 100-kilometer radius would be able to see and take the aircraft down. Since very few awakened could fight effectively in the air, being swarmed by winged abominations or taken down by a hail of ranged attacks from the ground was their worst nightmare. Still, that did not mean that there were no means of traversing the Antarctic center quickly. Since the terrain was much more flat near the coast, there was a convenient highway running along the shore of the cold ocean. It's just that traveling by it was not exactly safe, especially these days. The ocean, too, was overflowing with nightmare creatures. All kinds of horrors hid beneath its restless surface. Sunny sighed. No, let's not go anywhere near the coast. Avoid those old tunnels, too. Just take your time and take us over the mountains, Luster. Dorn needs time to recover anyway. The young man smiled. Yes, sir, will do, sir. Sunny gave him a bleak look and shook his head. Ever since the revelation of his identity as Mongrel, Luster had been acting as an overly enthusiastic sycophant. It was honestly a bit bothersome. Well, all right then. He walked back to the back of the Rhino and sat down to meditate. In the past month, the importance of replenishing one's essence had become painfully clear to all awakened in Antarctica. There were just too many nightmares creatures around and too many battles that had to be fought. Maintaining one's reserves was often the difference between life and death. It was also an inescapable restriction that defined how often and how well one could fight. Sunny's essence capacity was roughly 4 times as vast as that of almost any other master, but the rate at which his soul restored it was only twice as fast. As a result, he needed 3 to 4 days to fully replenish it. Sleep, rest, and meditation helped, but who had time to rest in Antarctica? All of them had to get accustomed to fighting while suffering from a dire deficit of essence. That was another reason why the campaign grew harder as days went by, and why everyone was exhausted. His cohort was in a much better spot than most thanks to Luster, but Sonny himself had not been able to make use of the young man's extraordinary aspect. Luckily, they were not supposed to fight any serious battles in the next few days. That was already a blessing. Keeping his eyes closed, Sonny rested as his shadows scouted the route ahead. The rhino climbed the steep slopes of the mountain chain with agility that was surprising for a machine of that size. The aurora australis shimmered with ethereal lights in the black sky above it, but the mountains themselves were shrouded in darkness. Driving a heavy APC up and down the treacherous slopes at night was not for the faint of heart, since one small mistake could send it plummeting down from a deadly height. Still, Luster seemed to be doing fine. He even had his lucky charm summoned, rubbing it from time to time with a nervous look. Everything seemed calm. Slowly but surely, they were moving toward their destination. Sonny made an effort to memorize as much of the landscape as he could, knowing that they might be coming back the same way after picking up the VIP at the research installation. The southern edge of the Transantarctic Mountains was, indeed, a real labyrinth. Tall peaks rose into the sky, with remnants of broken roads clinging to their slopes. Dark maws of tunnels that had been burrowed through the mass of stone appeared from time to time, filling him with a sense of alarm. The roads, as well as the tunnels, had been constructed long before he was born, during the dark times. Back then, humanity had been busy destroying itself in a series of devastating wars as the world fell apart around it. Then, the nightmare spell came, and many things changed. The old roads were now abandoned and in a state of disrepair, but the rhino could still make use of them. The progress was slow, however, and it was only made slower by the need to avoid active gates and prowling swarms of nightmare creatures. In the end, it took them almost 4 days to traverse the mountains and descend to the coastal plain at the southern edge of the Antarctic center. From here, they could proceed to the destination at full speed. As the rhino accelerated and flew across the plain, a powerful blizzard enveloped it, reducing the visibility almost to zero. That was when things started to go wrong. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.